Welcome to Theology in Action, in this series entitled, Why Study Church History? Significant Moments. In this series, we're going to look at great moments and great figures and discover why their lives matter and how they impact us today. Welcome to this series entitled, Why Study Church History's Significant Moments. In this opening episode, we're going to look at the life of Thomas Aquinas. And we're going to look at his life in three parts. We're going to look at his background, his accomplishments, and why his life matters for us today. Thomas was born in 1220 during the medieval era. Thomas was born to a wealthy royal family, such that he was born in the castle of Roca Seca. I think I pronounced that right. And was sent off to school at the age of 5 years old. He would go on to graduate from the college or the University of Naples. And one thing that's really important about Thomas's background is his family's vocation. It was military and it was also civil affairs. So Thomas's family was so into this that Thomas's future was set. That's what he was going to do. Well, when Thomas was in school, he found this great calling and love for what was called the Dominican order, which is a facet of the church that set out to study doctrine or teachings of the Christian faith and would take that teaching and preach it well in their context and also defend the faith against false teachings. Particularly at this time, it was the rise of Islam in that area. So Thomas said, I want to be a Dominican. I want to be a part of the Dominican order. But his family, particularly his brothers, said, no, we're not going to have Thomas go into, set apart into study and not join in our family vocation of wealth. And so what his brothers did was they locked him in a castle for a couple years. And during that time, they even tempted him with worldly pleasures that they had at their disposal because it was a wealthy family. As the reports go, Thomas actually he wasn't swayed. So during that time, his brothers said, well, we're just going to keep him in the castle until he changes his mind. That'll change his mind. Over the course of a few years, Thomas actually just set apart that time to study works. He studied all the way through the works of Aristotle, the known works of Aristotle at the time. He studied through Lombard's Sentences, which is a large work of all great Christian thinkers up to that point in history, categorized into topics. So he's just soaking in training and study for the Dominican order while his brothers locked him in the castle. So he turned it into a university study. With that background, Thomas went on to doing some great things with all that study. So Thomas goes off into the Dominican order, studies hard, and he ends up contributing significantly to the world of theology. And so just a couple highlights. We're looking at his accomplishments. He wrote over 60 works within 20 years. He died at the age of 48. Just get a picture of that to get a sense of his mind. This is a gifted intellect. 20 years, 60 works, and we're talking works that were well-developed, very orderly, masterful, even to this very day, still referenced and used by theologians and non-believers alike. He's just regarded as one of the great minds of history. In those works, this is probably where he is most attributed with his great accomplishments, is that his works actually did end up serving civil affairs. He wrote some of the earliest teachings that come out of his theology about the limitations of government and the liberty of the self. Came from Thomas Aquinas, still used today. But also he wrote such great theological works that one of them actually was called the Summa Theologica, which in Latin just means summary of theology. And in his summary of theology, he outlines the majority of Christian doctrine up to that time. So his works have been used throughout history. It's significant work, still impacting the civil world today, society and governance, and also the church. And one last note on these significant contributions of Thomas is that he actually did develop the 5 proofs for God. So if you acknowledge Thomas's first assumption about the existence of God, it naturally follows by certainty that God exists. Thomas is the one that reasoned that way, and it became known as natural theology, that nature boasts of the glory of God. And so he has these 5 arguments that if you grant him the first assumption, the argument holds necessarily. In other words, it can't be wrong. What do we learn from Thomas's life? I think Matthew 16, 24 and 25 really reflect who he is. That if anyone is to follow Christ, let him pick up his cross and follow Jesus. If we forfeit our soul for worldly things, what gain is it in eternity? And one thing that is really important, I saved here till the end about his background, is he not only had opposition from his family to continue in a different course, but Thomas had opposition from his own peers when he was in study. Think about that. His area of giftedness, he faced opposition. So they called him the dumb ox. His friends called him, so-called friends. Well, Thomas's response to that was never actually to use his intellect to pound them down. He could have. Thomas's intellect clearly could have used rhetoric and made his classmates feel stupid. He didn't do that. He actually responded with charity and love. He reflected Christ not only with his mind, but also with his actions, with his heart. And his professor at that time, one of the world's greatest theological and philosophical minds at that time, was his professor. This individual said, the whole world is going to hear the bellowing of this dumb ox through his writings. And sure enough, here we are today talking about Thomas Aquinas' writings. He is one who not only used his head, but also his heart. He used his intellect to proclaim the gospel and defend the faith, and he also used his hands and his attitude and his care for others to show the love and charity of the faith. May our lives reflect Thomas Aquinas in that way. Whatever gifting you have, use it for the glory of God and for the good. May you take this knowledge from the life of Thomas Aquinas and apply it to your lives in a rich way, in a meaningful way, to go out and live as an example of Christ to this world.